Okay, in this meeting, or in this video, we are going to talk about the first two sections of Unit 7 of the course description. I have chocolate on my lip there, which is going to really deal with nationalism and the force that it becomes in the 19th century. Now, before we get started, let's just make sure we understand what nationalism is. Nationalism is this emerging idea in European politics that the boundaries of a political state should align with the ethnic boundaries of how people live, right? So that instead of there being 38 German states, because German people share a language and a culture and a history, they should be united into a political group. And so nationalism can be a force of unification. However, nationalism can also be a divisive force. It can fragment places. The Austrian Empire during this time is multi-ethnic and multinational. And so many people are in there, like the Hungarians, are going to say, hey, we should have Hungarian autonomy within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, blowing that multi-national empire apart if the nationalists were to be successful. Okay, now that we got those basic definitions out of the way, let's get into the nuts and bolts of what the course description says. The big picture thing we want to look at for 7.2 deals with understanding the rise of nationalism as a political force, and then also what effects it will have through the years 1815 to 1914. All right, so nationalism is going to encourage a lot of different ideas and or policies, right? It will be embraced by different types of people looking to achieve different types of goals for different reasons. So sometimes there is this romantic idealism, and we're going to look at this when we look at some artwork. We're going to see how artists are going to portray revolution and emotion as this sort of unifying national force. Liberty Leading the People by Eugene Delacroix is one that we'll look at, which is a good example of this. Francisco de Goya of Spain was also a nationalist, a Spanish nationalist, who often evoked powerful nationalist feelings in his painting. Liberals are often going to embrace nationalism, particularly liberals in the German states. They are going to try and tie liberal reform, creating constitutional government, limitations on governmental power, popular sovereignty, those sorts of things, along with unification. Unification is going to be embraced by just political states. You know, Germany and Italy are going to be the best example of unification. We are also going to see that nationalism can be associated with racist thoughts. It often is, tied into anti-Semitism, right? If you're going to create nations based on nationality, eventually it's going to lead to this idea called blood nationalism, that there's something intrinsically good about the blood of certain people and that you should create nations based on that. Well, if you don't share that blood, there's nothing you can do to ever attain that, and so you become the other, the bad, whatever. Also, we will see nationalists often use nationalist rationalizations for national aggrandizement, right? Hey, we need to grow our borders. All Serbians need to be under Serbian rule. Or later on, Hitler will say all Germans need to be under the rule of the German Reich. Now, we're not going to get to that, obviously, but this can lead to aggression and expansion and war and things like that. And finally, you should just know some important nationalist groups. There are lots, right? Here's who the course description listed that we talked about in class. Giuseppe Mazzini is an Italian nationalist who fights for Italian unification in the 1800s. And then there is a group known as the Pan-Slavists. This is the Slavic peoples who are mostly a part of the Austrian Empire, but they may also be a part of the Ottoman Empire, who are going to seek a Slavic state that represents their sorts of interests. Serbia kind of becomes the leader of the Slavic peoples, and of course they are going to ally themselves with another Slavic nation, Russia, in attempting to achieve that. We didn't really get into this. We started talking about it when World War I came about. Austria-Hungary and Russia are going to have major beef over the Slavic question. Okay, so we had mentioned this briefly. With the rise in nationalism, eventually we're going to see a corresponding rise in anti-Semitism in European society. And so what does the rise in nationalism mean for the Jews? Well, like we said, more outbreaks of obvious anti-Semitism. Good examples of this that we talked about in class: the Dreyfus Affair. A French Jewish army official is accused of passing plans and military secrets to the Prussians during the Franco-Prussian War. Clearly, he's innocent. But he is railroaded by conservative, powerful forces in France, the military and the Roman Catholic Church. They forged documents, and they really stacked the deck against him to have him wrongfully convicted of this. Karl Lueger is going to be elected the mayor of Vienna, and he runs on an openly anti-Semitic sort of platform. And then in Germany, a party known as the Christian Social Party will have some electoral success there as well. And so what we see is that politicians, as European study becomes more democratic, they find that by playing these anti-Semitic notes, that they can get a pretty reliable percentage of the electorate. And so that is going to obviously have ominous, there's an ominous feature to that, obviously. Okay. Now, especially in Western Europe, some Jewish peoples are going to try to assimilate into Western European society. They will adopt the languages that are spoken there and the cultural features besides, they won't become Christian, but they will try to assimilate, right? And this is okay, and many Jews find that they have legal equality and civic equality in Western European states in particular by the 19th century. However, as nationalism begins to rise, even liberal states like France show that they're vulnerable to this anti-Semitic wave with the Dreyfus Affair. And so many Jews are going to begin to question, can the liberal democracies of Western Europe protect Jewish peoples? Some will say, sure, no problem, right? We're fine. We have civic equality. We'll be okay. We should just fit into society. Others, like Theodor Herzl, are going to encourage Zionism. Zionism is a form of Jewish nationalism, which basically states we won't be safe in Europe. We need our own land. We should go back to the biblically promised land of Palestine and create a Jewish state there that will protect Jewish people. And so this is a response to the increasing rise of anti-Semitism, is the growing popularity of the Zionist movement that obviously is going to pick up steam again in the 20th century. All right. Conservatives and nationalism. At first, conservatives in the early part of the 19th century were very afraid of nationalism and did everything they did everything they could to tamp it down. But politicians who are conservative, like Cavour and Bismarck, are going to show that nationalism is a force that can be used by conservative politicians to gain electoral support for conservative policies. Both the unification of Italy and Germany are done through warfare, but they are done by governments that are conservative in nature. Cavour is a monarchist. He does everything for the King of Piedmont, which is going to become the King of Italy once they unify. And Bismarck is the prime minister of the Prussian Kaiser, and he will become the German emperor when it's all done. So OVB and Cavour are both going to be leading conservative figures who use nationalism to suit their own political motivations. And then even Napoleon III of France is going to often have a, what's the word we want to use here? An adventuresome foreign policy. He's going to get himself involved in Italian unification, for example. He will go in during the revolutions of 1848 and protect the Pope from angry mobs that are happening there in Italy. And he does that to sort of, play up the French national issue, like we're all Catholics and Emperor Napoleon III is defending, the Pope, that sort of stuff. All right, and then finally, nationalism and the multi-ethnic empires. I sort of talked about this in my intro. We will see that nationalism not only can unify, but it can fragment. The dual monarchy, which the Hungarian ethnic group inside the Austrian Empire becomes powerful enough that they can essentially force the creation of a dual monarchy where the Emperor of Austria is the Emperor of the Hungarians too, but then they have virtually complete autonomy within the state. They have their own diet and own laws and all those sorts of things. So you get Hungarian autonomy within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then Pan-Slavism and the effects that it has on the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire is another example of the sort of destructive nature that nationalism can have. All right, that's 7.2. 7.3 is going to be about national unification and then diplomatic tensions that arise out of that. And obviously, at least to me, you should be thinking to yourself, oh, this has got to be about Germany, right? Because Germany, yes, Italy unifies too, but Germany's unification totally changes the balance of power in Central Europe, and it is going to have profound impacts on what is to come. All right, so the big picture. This is about German unification, but also Italian unification. You want to know the causes and the effects of these movements in the 19th century. So what are the causes of German and Italian unification? Well, there's a lot of causes here. One of the things that the course description mentions is the Crimean War. The Crimean War is going to end the concert of Europe, period. Basically, prior to this, European nations were, really interested in maintaining the status quo and using collective action to pursue that conservative goal. But after the Crimean War, everyone's kind of like, yeah, we're not as worried about stability as we once were. We're going to be more adventuresome. We're going to get into, conflict, and we're going to stoke tension and all that sort of stuff. And so it gives politicians like Bismarck, like Louis Napoleon in France, more leg room to sort of pursue things that otherwise they might not have been able to do. By the end of the Crimean War, the Ottoman Empire is weakening, Russian mystique has been shattered, and so the concert of Europe is gone. All right. Italian unification, you need to know Camillo di Cavour. He is the Prime Minister of Piedmont, the largest of the Italian states. It was created by the Congress of Vienna. And Cavour is going to use diplomacy. He is going to negotiate with other European countries, particularly France, to support Italian unification against Austrian desires to squash it, as well as he relies on sort of romantic Republican guerrilla groups led by another name you should know, Giuseppe Garibaldi. So Mazzini and Garibaldi are two influential Italian nationalists who will use violence to achieve those sorts of goals. And so Garibaldi controls the southern half. Cavour, through his machinations, is going to come to control the northern part. And then basically he is going to force Garibaldi to turn over control to the Piedmont king, essentially saying, like, we can either have a united Italy or we can go to war against one another and weaken ourselves. And Garibaldi, concedes and gives Cavour basically control of the continent. So some of the things that Cavour does that are diplomatic, he is going to send troops into the Crimean War, helping the British and French, trying to gain them as allies, trying to show that Italy is wearing their big boy pants, if you will. He is going to seek and gain an alliance with France. Louis Napoleon and Cavour will make secret agreements to provoke war with Austria that will lead to Italian unification. And so that's all we need to know for Italy. The much more important one, Germany. German unification is really the brainchild of Otto von Bismarck, right? Bismarck is going to promote a realpolitik, of the politics of reality. He says, blood and iron is what is going to unify Germany, not flowery speeches and constitutions. He's very critical of the liberals of 1848 who founded the Frankfurt Parliament and thought that, just like meeting and talking about things would get stuff done. Bismarck is going to say, forget that. We're going to make it happen. And the way it's going to happen is through blood and iron. And what he's referring to here is iron is Prussian industrial might, right? Prussia is rapidly industrializing, and they are going to become the most economically powerful German state. And then blood is, warfare. That's how this is going to be achieved. Bismarck is going to selectively pick fights with Denmark, then Austria, and finally France. And the end result of those will be he will be able to coerce the German states into an alliance, which eventually he will then use sort of manipulation of democratic features to get them to vote for the emergence of the German Empire. All right, so there we go. So Germany in post-1871, the effects of its creation is pretty profound. Now, Germany post-1871, Bismarck famously says that Germany is satisfied. They are not going to be an expansionist. They are not going to try to extend their borders any more than they already have. Now, that's all well and good, but France is very salty about the creation of Germany anyway. Number one, France lost territory. Alsace-Lorraine was taken by the Germans, taken by the Germans from France. That's a source of national embarrassment. Also, the German Empire was proclaimed in Versailles, you know, the ancestral is not the right word, but the symbolic home of French monarchy and the French state in and of itself. And, you know, part of the Treaty of Paris that ended the Franco-Prussian War said that the Prussians got to have a military parade down the Champs-Élysées. And so they were just really rubbing their nose in it. So France is super salty. And so Bismarck is going to construct an alliance system to make sure that France is isolated so that Germany is not threatened on both sides of its borders. Bismarck is really good at this. He's quite good at creating a balance of power and creating alliance systems in which Germany is always in the driver's seat. Some examples of this will be the Three Emperors League, which unite Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia into a defensive alliance, and then also the Triple Alliance, which will be Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. This will be the alliance system that leads into World War I. Now, this works really well as long as Bismarck is the puppeteer pulling the strings of the alliance system, but when he's removed from power in 1890, the alliance system is going to become very much dividing Europe into two, and it's going to drag participants into World War I. So when Bismarck's not there to manipulate it, it becomes quite dangerous to European peace, but quite effective at European peace as long as Bismarck's in charge. And of course, the Balkans are going to be a flashpoint of nationalist tension going forward. After Italy and Germany have unified, there is going to be the sort of like epicenter of nationalist rumblings will be the Balkans, that area in Southeast Europe that's breaking away from the Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe that is no longer able to control its territory. Austria-Hungary is going to try and put the kibosh on any sort of Slavic nationalism there, because any nationalist gains by any group endangers all of Austria, because every nationalist group will then look for the same thing. Complicating matters, Russia sees themselves as, you know, the big brother to the Slavic peoples, and so they're going to insert themselves into this conflict, and it's going to get messy. And obviously, this is going to be the place where World War I begins. So some examples they list in the course description: the Bosnia-Herzegovina crisis, the First and Second Balkans War. You don't really need to go into great detail about that. It's basically just Slavic peoples attempting to get more land, more autonomy, and Austria-Hungary gobbling up the territory like Bosnia-Herzegovina and not allowing for that to happen, and tensions increasing because of that. All right, that's it for nationalism. When we talk again, it will be a pretty short video. We're only going to look at 7.4 and 7.5, which deal with science in the 19th century. One of the very last things we talked about in class before we all went away. So until next video, I will see you.